Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Chapter 1. The Riddle House. The villagers of Little Hangington still called it the Riddle House, even though it had been many years since the Riddle family had lived there. It stood on a hill overlooking the village, and some of its windows were boarded, tiles missing from its roof, and ivy spreading unchecked over its base. Once a fine-looking manor, and easily the largest and grandest building for miles around, the Riddle House was now damp, derelict, and unoccupied. The Little Hangingtons all agreed that the old house was creepy. Half a century ago, something strange and horrible had happened there, something the older inhabitants of the village still liked to discuss when topics for gossip were scarce. The story had been picked over so many times and had been buried in so many places, nobody was quite sure what the truth was anymore. Every version of the tale, however, started in the same place. 50 years before, at daybreak on a fine summer's evening, when the Riddle House had still been well kept and impressive, a maid had entered the drawing room to find all three riddles dead. The maid had run screaming down the hill into the village and roused as many people as she could. Lying there with their eyes wide open, cold as ice, still in their dinner things. The police were summoned, and the whole of Little Hangington seethed with shocked curiosity and ill-disguised excitement. Nobody wasted their breath pretending to feel very sad about the riddles, for they had been unpopular. Elderly Mr. and Mrs. Riddle had been rich, snobbish, and rude, and their grown-up son Tom had been anything if worse. All the villagers cared about was the identity of their murderer, for plainly 3 apparently healthy people did not drop dead of natural causes on the same night. The Hanged Man, the village pub, did a roaring trade that night. The whole village seemed to have turned out to discuss the murderers. They had been rewarded for leaving their firesides when the riddles cook arrived dramatically in their midst and announced to the suddenly silent pub that a man called Frank Bryce had just been arrested. "Frank!" cried several people. "Never!" Frank Bryce was the riddle's gardener. He lived alone in a rundown cottage on the grounds of the Riddle House. Frank had come back towards the war with a very stiff leg and a great dislike of crowds and loud noises, and had been working for the riddles ever since. "Always thought he was odd," she told the eagerly listening villagers after her fourth cheery. "Unfriendly-like. I'm sure I've offered him a cup at once. I've offered it 100 times. Never wanted to mix, he didn't." "Ah, now," said a woman at the bar. "He had a hard war, Frank. He liked a quiet life. There's no reason to—" "Who else had a key to the back door then?" barked the cook. "There's always been a spare key hanging from the gardener's cottage far back as I can remember. Nobody forced the door open last night. No broken windows. All Frank had to do was creep on the big house while we were sleeping." The villagers exchanged dirty looks. "I always thought